Yes, Guyana to the world.
Globespan is a Guyanese dialogue moving towards the realization of one nation in one Guyana. It's a platform that offers an all-inclusive discussion with the pros, the cons, the ones that is taken aside, and the ones that stand in the middle. Globespan believes agreeing and disagreeing are part of the nation's building.
She is a beauty, beautiful Guyana, with wonderful people all over this country.
Globespan believes every Guyanese voice is part of the nation's building. As we span the globe for voices from the diaspora and those living home, we stand on our commitment that we are all Guyanese working towards one nation in one Guyana. As the world turns on its axis bringing changes, we as Guyanese must adapt to those changes for a better Guyana for all. Globespan stands on its axis with its belief that one nation, one Guyana, one destiny must include voices from all corners of Guyana.
With many flavor, 6 different people blended together. Raise your flag high in unity, we're family with one destiny. Raise your flag high in unity.
Good evening, Globespanners, and welcome again. I have to protest because this is the second week in succession that Noah has asked me 2 hours before the show to step in. I feel like the ugly duckling who doesn't get the first prize, but we're very lucky to have an intriguing and quite powerful character with us this evening, Lennox Schumann. Lennox, welcome.
Thank you for having me on, and good evening to all the viewers. Thanks to Nohar and the team.
Great. Lennox, some of the others who should have joined us this evening pulled out for various reasons. And so you've got an opportunity to all by yourself for 1 hour to make the case for Lennox Schumann as the future president of Guyana and the best person to manage all of this oil money. Is that a deal?
Well, I don't know that I can get that far. It's a mountain of a task to do that in just 1 hour. And I'm sorry that the other candidates or the other guests did not want to participate or pull out. I think it would have been a very exciting debate/conversation.
That's fine, but we got to turn the lemons into lemonade. Lennox, let me make a confession. Before we spoke this afternoon, I really didn't know you. In fact, I'd seen pictures of you in quite decorous costumes and things, showing your nice legs, and that's what I understood. The sum total of Lennox Schumann. But I want to ask you before we get too heavy, why don't we spend some time talking about Lennox Schumann, the person? Give us some bio data. Where were you born? Tell us the story of your life so far, Lennox.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's not a story that I get asked to tell very often, and I think sometimes it gets lost. People tend to think that Lennox Schumann just showed up on scene and this is it, right? I was born in St. Cuthbert's, now known as Pakuri, up the Mahika River. And I descend from a long line of chiefs, from my dad all the way down to the founders of our community. We're talking over 500 years of history here. So yeah, I grew up there. And when I was in high school, I left and finished high school in Canada. Finished college in Canada. I worked in Canada for a long time. And then I returned to my community to be the chief of my community. I contested those elections in 2015 and I won. And I served as chief of my community from 2015 to 2018. During which time I also served as the vice chairman of the National Two House Council. And from there we saw a lot of issues that Indigenous peoples faced. We didn't think that the government at the time was really addressing it. And some of that kind of led me into what I'd say national politics, because I think if you can't have a political voice, sometimes you're sidelined and the issues never get resolved. So I'm happy to say that, getting into politics in itself has provided not only an insight, but also provided some resolutions to some of the issues. I can't say all of them. I can't say all of them, but it's a work in progress, right?
Yeah, yeah. And Lennox, as we discussed this afternoon, I want to spend some more time on the person, because part of the challenge I know that public figures have is that they sometimes they get a very scripted and not scripted by themselves, by various media forms of themselves. So I want to spend a few more minutes on your path as a young person, and then we're going to look at at some of your politics, and then spend some time on the budget. So can we go back? You said you schooled, and then you went to Canada. Where did you go to school?
I attended North Georgetown Secondary School. And when I was in fourth form, I left and came to Canada, and I finished high school.
Okay.
Yeah. I graduated also from Confederation College in Thunder Bay with a business diploma and a commercial pilot's license. So I've been an airline pilot, a pilot and an airline pilot for about 26 years now.
Right. And tell me this, you do you have a family of your own kids?
A beautiful wife, three lovely children, 2 boys, 1 girl.
Nice.
The eldest is in high school. The second is in middle school, and the third is in elementary.
Right. And just a couple more things about you as the person. You said you grew up in St. Cuthbert's Mission. Tell me a little bit about that. I've never been to St. Cuthbert's Mission. Paint the picture for us. Where is it? Well, what's the day in the life of a normal St. Cuthbertian?
It's up the Mahaica River, and one of the things that I've done a tremendous lot of work to is try to dispel the nature of St. Cuthbert's, because we're an Indigenous community. And if you were to ask people in the community who St. Cuthbert is, no one really knows. So, I've used the traditional name Pakuri for a long time, and I sincerely hope that people understand that. And it is rooted in the dispossession and the oppression of what I look at colonial masters, what they did to Indigenous peoples across the globe, really. And trying to recapture part of our identity. So Pakuri is a little community of the Mahaica River. You could also access it from Linden Highway. And growing up there, we grew up during the Burnham era. Well, at least myself, my family, my siblings. So we lived through that, and it was a bit of a challenge. But the community in itself is a beautiful community. Lots of sand. The headwaters of the Mahaica River is situated in our community, and it is the most accessible community to Georgetown, to the city, because you could simply drive in 2 hours and drive back out if you wanted to.
That sounds like a really idyllic childhood. What were some of the challenges? I mean, and what were some of the highlights for you before you went off to Canada?
Well, the challenges were many. I mean, I made a post earlier today, and I think we could probably get into that a bit later. But growing up under the PNC back in, as a child was really, really difficult. From our community to the highway is 12 miles. It was 12 miles by road, and back then we couldn't get some of the bare necessities in the community. We could plant as much as we want, but if you needed sugar and salt and stuff like that, you'd have to walk to Long Creek for that. So we would wake up at around 1 o'clock in the morning, start walking. By 6 o'clock, we'd be in the line at Long Creek, and the place would open at 8. And what we would see is just people who had PNC cars would just come and jump the line in front of us, and we would get up to the window, and they would simply say, "All right, well, you know what? You got to come back tomorrow. We're all out for today." So then we would leave Long Creek and walk all the way back into the community. That's 4 hours one way, so 8 hours of walking just to go back empty-handed. So it was a tremendous challenge for us. When I wrote what was then called SSEE, now NGSA, I actually won a scholarship, and that scholarship took me, even though I had marks for President's College, I ended up being awarded North Georgetown Secondary School. That in itself was also another challenge because I had no family in Georgetown. It was all new. So I stayed with guardians, and it was never really a situation where people looked at us indigenous peoples and say, you know what, these are the first peoples, we need to maybe give them a bit of respect and let's accommodate them. I know one of my guardians would very often threaten to beat me just because I was indigenous. And the other guardian would cook one pot of curry on a Sunday, every Sunday, and that pot of curry would last me through the entire week, only for me. And that would be 3 meals a day. So when I was done with Guyana, sorry, when I left Guyana, I said, you know what? I came to Canada and people said, well, we could go to this nice Guyanese restaurant. I said, nope. I think I've had enough curry to last me a lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Lennox, you know, part of the challenge of Ghana is that we've all had very different realities in many respects. And listening to your story as a young person, I got to tell you, it doesn't resonate a lot with me because I had a very different upbringing. I grew up in a resolutely strong PNC family, and my reality seems to be very different. And I think this is part of what we need to do. We need to try and understand each other's realities. So thanks for sharing that. And I could hear that a little bit of emotion creeping into your tone. You're a pilot.
Correct.
Why would you name your airline El Dorado Airlines? You think that's reassuring?
May not be reassuring. The El Dorado Airlines, it comes with a certain sense of mysticism. You know, it's sort of like calling your community Atlantis, just
right.
because it is rooted in a different mystique, really. We could call it many other indigenous names, like Guyana, for example. Guyana is our word. It's an indigenous word. We could call it Kaichur. We could call it any one of the river's names, which all have their origins in indigenous identity. But the mysticism is not there, right? So El Dorado in itself, it is meant to market Guyana to the world. So the people, when they hear El Dorado, it's a throwback to when the explorers would want to come, and it's encouraging people to look at Guyana through a different lens, which would be through a tourism lens.
Right.
This would explore.
And how's the airline doing?
We are still a work in progress.
Okay. Airlines are pretty tricky things. I've been involved in setting up a couple in Southern Africa. They're a fast way to lose money. So
there's a saying that says, how do you make a millionaire? You take a billionaire and tell him to start his airline.
Absolutely.
The part that is always missed in that conversation is the part of bad advice, right? How do you make a millionaire? You give someone $1 billion and give them bad advice in starting an airline.
Yeah.
Good advice. I mean, let's take Emirates, for example. In 1985, Emirates Airlines started off with $10 million US. They were flying to 4 destinations. Today, Emirates' revenue stream is I think over 300 billion. They're transporting 60 million passengers per year. Their profits are in the billions. So once again, it's just if you give the person wrong advice, then they're going to lose money. But
yeah,
great advice goes a long way, and it's everything.
We'll get another opportunity for you to share some of your detailed knowledge on this space. But I had a quick look at your Facebook page, and you have some interesting views on Trump, which are also related to some of your local political views. I think there's a very strongly worded Facebook post where you said, you know, there's no way you could ever vote or contemplate the PNC being a party you'd support. But people would question your reliability. You know, there's liberty and justice, and now people are not sure where you are. You got into a very interesting relationship with Anug and the new movement. talk us through that episode particularly, and where is Lennox now? Which party is he part of? What does he represent?
Well, let's walk back a little bit, right? From where I started, my childhood memories and the life that I lived under the PNC. And I have seen, I think that the passage of Dr. Walter Rodney was a tragic loss for the country. And I looked at David Hines's posts, and he's a Black nationalist. Guyana is a land of 6 nations, what they call 6 races, right? So how do we now, if I'm to go there and I say I'm an indigenous nationalist and no one else has a right, and everyone that disagrees with me, I browbeat them or insult them and everything else, then I really don't speak to the national identity of Guyana.
Yeah.
And to know that David Hines,
Lennox, sorry,
Yep.
I don't want to interrupt you, but people like David Hines aren't here to defend themselves. So I'm happy for you to refer to people's views anonymously, but until we get a chance where he can have a right of reply, let's avoid mentioning people specifically, please.
Yeah, so it is once again to offer context, right? You ask me a question, and there has to be a context within which it is framed. If not, I'm just, what is Lennox Schumann really doing here? So there has to be a context as to where the political movement started. So when you look at all of these inflammatory statements and everything else, and I superimpose my experience under APNU when I was chief of my community, and all of the things that they tried to do to me as a young indigenous chief, just trying to lead my people, trying to get resolution to many of these indigenous problems. That is pretty much the genesis of the Liberty and Justice Party. We signed an agreement in earnest with ANOG and TNM, and we respected that agreement. And no one can come back to me and say, well, Lennox, we signed an agreement and you never did. But what ANOG and TNM did without consulting the Liberty and Justice Party was they excluded us, and they went and made a secret deal with TNM. And now Asha Kissoon is now in Parliament, which in my humble view is a betrayal of trust, and it is undermining any kind of gentleman nature that we have ever had. And I'm really disappointed in ANOG for taking that position, and they have made their own bed, so now they lie in it.
And how could we, because Guyana has always had and always will have different forms of coalitions. How do we go forward in a way which allows parties to get together either pre or post election and still have a measure of predictability and a consensus as to how these things operate? What would you do to with the constitution, with the way in which we assemble our parliament, etc.? What could we improve?
Well, I think let's start from where we're at right now, right? And I think there has been a tremendous erosion of confidence in any third party, and rightly so. AFC had a golden opportunity. They placed themselves in camp with APNU. They tried to hijack the country, which is proof that that formulation of third party politics does not work. And had they gotten their way, who knows? We might have been living in the North Korea of South America. And what ANOG and TNM has simply done is reinforce that position that third parties simply cannot be trusted. If they could, they would honor their agreements. They would be very forward with it and offer that very same thing that you talk about, predictability. The Constitution in itself, there are a lot of things that potentially can change, but I don't think that you could legislate good behavior. You cannot legislate humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those things, it comes out in the people, and if the people in themselves cannot be trusted, then how do we know? You could put all of the best intentions. I mean, we've got laws against murder and other various crimes, but yet people still commit them.
Mm. So, Lennox, why is it that the courts don't seem to be able to resolve this?
A lot of it is rooted in people's behavior and the way they've always viewed themselves. Part of the genesis of it is how we operated post as a post-colonial nation, we never really found ourselves, we never really saw ourselves as worthy of a lot of things. We never really popped out and say, you know what, I'm going to do something that, and this is a very general statement, right? When people get into power, they see it as, well, now I have the opportunity to do this, and I'm going to do it, and no one's going to tell me anything. And I remember during APNU's tenure, also when I was Tushaw, and you'd meet some of these police officers, they would say, no, we're in office now, so you just go and shut up. I had no political affiliation at that time, but that is the psychology that is very dominant. And I think some people get into that position and they feel, well, no, I have the power, and you're not going to tell me what I'm going to do. So it erodes once again the trust that anyone should have in any third party.
Right. And what are your politics now? Are you still running Liberty and Justice Party? Are you part of a new formation? Where are you?
Our membership has not had an opportunity to sit down and talk about that as yet. We have, when we campaigned on some very, very fundamental issues. And obviously you put out the manifesto. Manifesto is meant to govern, right? If I win government, this is what I will do. No one ever sits there and say, well, if I don't win government, this is what I'm going to do. So you set a path with a manifesto, or a manifesto stated some things. And we have worked very diligently and assiduously in supporting where we can the PPP, and in influencing as much as we can how those things get delivered. And when we look at the correlation between what the PPP had in their manifesto and what we had, when we did a very critical analysis of it, it was just around 88% alike. All of it like align, I mean. So we have worked with them to support some of their initiatives and obviously influence as much as we can. And we have seen some very, very positive results.
Can you be specific? I mean, name a couple for us.
Well, we've had an opportunity to input into the local content legislation. We've had an opportunity to input into the low carbon development strategy. We see some other initiatives that are being rolled out in line with Budget 2025. You know, and I think we'll get to those eventually. And we've seen, you know, a change in the government's approach towards Indigenous peoples. There's a lot more of a positive nature to it, a lot more of an open door and receptive nature to it, and we were happy about that.
Right. You know, we're going to come on to the issue of the budget just now and issues around allocations to various bits of the economy and also to various bits of the demographics. But I want to stick a little bit with the structure of our politics. So you're leading LNJ, and you are developing a very close relationship with the PPP. Why are you not merging? Why remain a separate party?
When we started off, we did not start off with merging or coalescing as our primary objective. We started off with making a difference for the people. And our objective was to make that difference. Where we sit right now, once again, our executive is not met, and it is not something that we have spoken about. Whether or not it will happen, I can't really say. I think the only way we can tell on that is when the executive has an opportunity to meet and discuss it.
But your clear preference is to merge.
My clear preference is to continue to work in the interests of the people.
That's a very politician answer, Lennox. But that's fair enough. Lennox, can I ask you something else about the Constitution? The Constitution now doesn't allow post-electoral PACs. What's your view on that?
I strongly believe that the Constitution, there's currently a Constitutional Reform Commission that is constituted. And I think that when they get down to it, I sincerely hope that they agree and that they find ways to amend that so that it permits post-electoral coalition. And I think once we get to that benchmark, we may see some marked change in how people operate politically in Guyana. Of course, there are a lot of problems that come with that. Governments can collapse in a heartbeat. You know, I don't like what you're doing, so I'm going to pull my support. So it could create a lot of heartache, and I don't know that Guyana's economy, where it is right now, can withstand that. We are on an upward trajectory, massive growth, and I think that if we were to interrupt the governance in itself, whether, you know, if we're to interrupt the governance, then it could create some economic shocks in the system that I don't know that it would be in the best interest of Guyana right now.
Sorry, I'm not quite following you. You're saying that the disruptions of coalitions could lead to governance challenges. Is that what you're saying?
Right. That governments can collapse. I mean, and sometimes governments in themselves. I mean, look at Israel, for example. Israel is conducting a genocide in full view of the world, but yet they're holding together a very thin coalition of extremists. And because of those extremists, you know, the government is, I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu has his own problems, and he does not want the government to collapse, because if it does, it creates a different issue for him. So I'm not saying that the same applies in Guyana, but what I'm saying is that governments, if you're to deal with post-electoral coalition and parties get in there stands a strong possibility that governments can collapse. Canada in itself is holding on by a string. Whether or not it is yielding positive results for the people, it is yet to be seen. I mean, that's for the Canadians to decide. But where you find these coalitions, you generally find disruptions in government.
So you're not in favor of coalitions?
I think it is something that requires a lot more thought. And I'm not sure that Guyana in itself, where it is, can withstand that kind of coalition. I mean, if you look at once again what AFC and APNU did in 2015. They formed a coalition and they were taking the country down a path that potentially would have been a dictatorship. So I don't think that any constitutional changes can once again help the nature of some people.
Lennox, are you suggesting that the members or the philosophies and the socialization of APNU and AFCs inevitably lead to dictatorships?
Well, we were on a very, very, very short path to getting there. Had it not been for the support of parties like my own and the international community, we would have been there. What they attempted to do in 2020 was to steal an entire nation. And that is a coalition government. So once again, I don't think the maturity in Guyana is there just yet for us to start discussing some of, you know, what would coalition politics look like.
So how is it that Guyana is a nation of 6, perhaps even now with an increasing amount of mixed race unions, etc., probably 7 distinct demographics. So how do we manage our politics in that context? How do we get away from coalitions? We've had coalitions. I mean, some people would argue that PPPC and PNCR are coalitions. We've had coalitions which brought us to independence. I'm trying to understand what's your vision for Guyana establishing and becoming a lot more stable and accommodating the diversity of views we have. What does it look like?
I think at this juncture, Guyana actually calls for a lot of small independent parties, not necessarily third parties, to join coalition, you know. I think looking at it through the lens that parties have to come up and obviously prove themselves, prove that they have the people's interests at heart. So I really don't see coalition politics being very, very strong in Guyana. And I don't see that we have the kind of space for it. Once again, the country in itself, feels very jaded in what transpired in 2020. So that in itself, it left such a bitter taste in many people's mouths. And I say mine more so because I sat in Guyana and I guarded ballot boxes. I had to go and do a painful recount of every vote. I sat there, I got kicked out of a recount center, not once, not twice, multiple times, when I had a very legal and legitimate reason to be there. And that happened, that transpired under a coalition government.
Okay, so sorry, go on.
Yeah, so I think it is, we are not at that level of maturity nationally as yet to start looking at what coalition politics would look like. We would have to obviously get by certain benchmarks, and I think when we have the mixed population grow to a certain, I'd say a bit more, then we would be in a better position to start opening that box.
Okay. So Lennox, I just want to summarize this bit of it. So we've got lots of, you said that we need lots of small parties in order to represent these diversities of views, but you're not confident that coalitions can work. So perhaps some other time we should investigate a little bit further how these small parties are going to form governments, etc. But I wanted to move on and ask you a much more direct question about LNJ. Is it an Amerindian party?
Let me interrupt you here for a sec. I don't want to just look at what happened with APNUAFC. I mean, I am speaking from a position of authority because I know exactly what transpired between LJP, ANOG, and TNM. The case in point is right before you as to why coalition in itself is not the way forward for Guyana right now. Our party was completely excluded, in fact, bypassed from an agreement that we signed, a written agreement. And that is something that we did wholeheartedly. We genuinely wanted it to work. But yet, imagine those parties did not even have an opportunity to get a full seat. Imagine if they got into office, what Guyana would look like. So there's a tremendous loss of trust in third parties. And I will say that personally, just because of the experience that I had not only with APNU-AFC, but also with ANOG and TNM.
Right. And as I said, it's really interesting. I'd never heard you made this point before, and perhaps it's something we could come back to. But I was asking you, is LNJ, Liberty and Justice, is it an Amerindian party?
No. I mean, a tremendous lot of our leadership is Amerindian, but we also have non-Indigenous persons in the party who hold executive positions. And we sit there and we chart a path forward. We initially looked at a lot of the Indigenous issues, and we did that very deliberately because in Parliament you've got, when I sat there, I said, you've got all of these other politicians who are looking out for the coast. Now I need to raise a voice for Indigenous peoples. And that's what I did. I'm not saying that other political parties don't look out for Indigenous people's interests. I'm just saying that it is not something that they look at as priority, or maybe not historically.
So neither the PNC or PPP prioritize Indigenous people's challenges.
Is when we talk about the change in behavior and change in approach, one of the reasons why I supported the PPP through my tenure in Parliament is because I saw that approach. I saw a positive approach. And in all reality, Lennox Schumann was the deputy, the vice chairman of the National Two-Shells Council. And it didn't matter how much I campaigned, a lot more people still voted for the People's Progressive Party. And the few that voted for us, we tried to represent them to the best of our abilities. And people voted for the PPP because they strongly believe and they have confidence in what the PPP can deliver. And I think that they did.
Well, Lennox, I know tomorrow morning I'm going to go and place a bet on where you're, which party you'll belong to in a few months. Lennox, I want to turn now, because we're here to discuss, it's a post-budget discussion. And I want to spend the rest of the time looking at what happened in the budget. And I know that as a leader of a political party, you would have obviously spent a lot of time looking at the budget. And there are two areas I'd like to examine particularly, given what you've said. One, I want to ask you about allocations made which directly or primarily subsist to the Amerindian communities. And secondly, the love of your life, which is air transport and air infrastructure, which is critical in Guyana given our demography. What do you want to tell us are the highlights from the budget in those two areas?
In 2021, when the indigenous leaders came to Georgetown for the National Two Shows Conference, we were just exiting COVID. And when the leaders met, they told the president and the vice president and cabinet in very plain language that airfares are too high. And one of the reasons that the airlines or the air operators gave was, the poor infrastructure, the cost of fuel, to name a few, right? So what I can tell you that the government has done is that the government has removed taxes from fuel. By doing that, aviation fuel is also in that, right? And by doing that, what they've done is taken off a component of that airfare. They have undertaken to repair the runways in many of those communities. Granted, they're not all paved, but it's a process. That in itself reduces the maintenance costs, and that should also impact the transportation sector for those communities. And I don't want to look at budget 2025 only in isolation, because budget is a building block really on how the nation builds itself. So all of that started from 2021, 22, 23, 24, and 25. So we're in 25 now. And it's been a constant building process where all of these things get done. What budget 2025 would have done is outside 2024, the National Two Shows Council, which is the national representative body of indigenous peoples, received $600 million. That gives them a lot of latitude to undertake a tremendous lot of work on behalf of indigenous peoples. Outside of that, they also get an annual subvention. There's a brand new secretariat for the National Two Shows Council. And communities last year also, with the sale of carbon credits, communities received upwards of $30 million per community to undertake economic development activities. These are things that had never been done. And this year also, there is still a lot more money on the books for those communities to deal with economic integration and how they deal with their microeconomies, promoting tourism, promoting small businesses. And when you couple all of that with the government's national programs of GOAL and other scholarships and all that stuff, it's hard to argue that the budget did not have things for indigenous peoples and for communities generally, because the GOAL scholarships are there for everyone. The revamp of education, the revamp of the healthcare system, it is not only indigenous peoples that are benefiting from that, it is the entire country.
Yeah. Can I be devil's advocate, Lennox? Because I mean, I think you, as any Guyanese, you have a very strong passion for what you believe the current government is doing for indigenous peoples. Let me be devil's advocate. When I grew up, I understood and I saw around me and heard lots of rhetoric and in many cases substantive things being done in the name of improving the lives of indigenous peoples. There were lots of cultural things the Benabs built. There were people in my class who benefited from scholarships, and to the extent that there were funds available, infrastructure, etc., was built, airstrips, etc. What do you think distinguishes what happened then, which many would argue that was very pioneering stuff done for indigenous communities, both culturally and also materially, and what's happening on what's the substantive difference?
There are a lot of differences, and if we really want to get into some of the harder wounds, my dad left the military because he was being threatened by non-indigenous peoples when he was up for promotion, and that is during the Barnum era. My mom could not get any promotion or anywhere in Guyana because she was the wrong color. She did not have a party card. When you look at scholarship and access to it, everyone in Guyana has access to scholarship now. And in many cases in indigenous communities, you don't need a scholarship to go to high school anymore because the government would have undertaken to build secondary schools in those communities, my community being one of them. So I no longer have to go and be abused by a guardian. I could go to high school right in my community. And that is real in many indigenous communities. you'd have the occasional communities where the population is not large enough to justify an entire structure and all of that stuff. So you may have a secondary department, or you may have a secondary school that is one community over, because many communities have satellite communities. So you put the secondary school in the core so that the satellites could feed into those. So yeah, you no longer have to go out and be abused by guardians in Georgetown just to go to secondary school. You can do that right in your community. And those are some very stark differences from when I grew up to now.
And if we were to look at it in terms of the budgets, what proportion of the budgetary spend goes to areas which you would identify as primarily benefiting indigenous peoples? What's the number?
I have not had an opportunity to disaggregate that, at least not for the purposes of this conversation. But I know when I spoke to Minister Manik Chan last week, she indicated that there are about 5 secondary schools that are going into some major communities, aside from the ones that they've already constructed in 21, 22, 23, and 24. So it's a work in progress.
Okay, so I think what might be merited here is a discussion between yourself and probably someone who represents the other side of the coin, who might make slightly different arguments. But Lennox, I want to again record my empathy, given the challenges you had growing up. That couldn't have been very pleasant in any respect, and it's a tribute to your resilience and your hard work that you're now a pilot and you've got your own business. So congrats to you.
Thanks. And I say that, because there is a lot of, I don't want to say anger, but I also know that I really don't want for Guyana to walk back to those days. I mean, I sat there in Parliament when the opposition leader was speaking in Parliament, and he was championing the cause. He said, we are proud that we banned substances in Guyana, right? Food stuff, all of that stuff. I mean, if your legacy is to be proud that you have denied a nation growth, a nation an opportunity to know something that is different, even though the economic environment might have been different, yes, I acknowledge that. But I also remember that I showed up at mass games. And I was a flag bearer for mass games when Barnham and his family sat in the stands, literally eating grapes, drinking wine, carrying on like their merry self. And there is this little indigenous guy standing in the hot sun, almost fainting. And we've got the president sitting right there, couldn't give 2 cents about the people that are sitting there baking in the sun. And we were predominantly indigenous kids holding flags to entertain the maximum leader. So there's a lot of things that I really look at historically. And when 2020 rolled around and the whole elections fiasco, it really triggered a lot of fears in me that I don't want for Guyana to ever walk back into that position. And to hear Aubrey Norton stand up in Parliament and say we're proud of that, I really don't know how one can be proud of that legacy. Right.
Lennox, I just want to pivot back a little bit to the actual budget. You're very clear that the allocations and the work being done as a result of those are resulting in improvements for indigenous peoples. What are the outcome rates for things like education and healthcare over the period you mentioned?
When I sat in Parliament, it was a lot more of an intimate discussion with the ministers in the various sectors. And I remember sitting there with Dr. Frank Anthony, Minister of Health, and the Director General of Public Health, Dr. Vishwa Mahadio, speaking about some of the initiatives that are happening in many indigenous communities. In some communities, you can enjoy e-medicine. You need not go and hop on a plane or a bike or a boat or something and get out of your community. Right there and then, through Wi-Fi and through the country's electrification drive and all that stuff, you could literally sit in the health center in those communities and have a doctor virtually walk you through the entire process to supporting your patients. That was not there pre-2020. The whole e-classroom that many communities can benefit from now. If we were to get to some of the other more fundamental things, you know, the accessibility to communities. You've got roads going in to many communities where people historically would have said, well, it's economy of scale. Well, yeah, but we're all Guyanese, we all pay taxes. So how does the economy of scale factor into that? And this government is which where they say, no, we want all Guyanese plugged into the economy. So we are going to provide the necessary infrastructure to give everyone that opportunity. And I've seen the government take an active approach to getting that done.
And Lennox, in terms of direct empirical evidence of the effectiveness of this increased spend and the new roads and things like telemedicine, which are truly amazing facilities, are you able to tell us, for example, what's happened to mortality rates of infants? What are the outcome rates for kids at school, etc.?
I don't have.
Could we track the outcomes to the spend in directly?
I don't have that data at hand.
Okay.
I would tell you though that for our next conversation, I definitely will ensure that I have it.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I know you, like myself, you were caught a little bit unawares about the numbers, but I think this would be important because I can hear people outside there making arguments which might be diametrically opposed to the ones you're making, which is fine. You know, as we're moving towards the close of things, Lennox, tell me a little bit about your vision. What is it? I mean, I presume you're still going to be actively engaged in politics. I mean, you're in Canada now, but I presume Guyana is still home. What's your vision for Guyana going forward?
I look at Guyana where everyone feels at home, where Guyanese need not leave the shores of Guyana to say that I've, you know, because I can go somewhere and live a life that I have made it in life. And I've seen people take that approach now where they look at Guyana and they say, I need not go anywhere. But I don't want for that to be the exception. I want for that to be the norm, where everyone sits there and say, you know what, this is home, I love it here. And if I go away, it's just to go away for, you know, see something new. But I have no intentions of leaving Guyana. And it has to be inclusive. Inclusive where everyone moves ahead together. Obviously, there will be challenges. But I also look at a Guyana where everyone is plugged into the economy, where everyone has access to the basics, right? Healthcare, education, good infrastructure, healthy drinking water, all that stuff. And I also look at Guyana where we depend far less on some of the other destructive activities. I think as we start to transform into an oil economy, I would like to see that the country shifts away from mining. Whether or not that's a realistic approach, I'm not sure, because it's still a fairly wealthy country with resources. But I also am acutely aware of the impacts, the negative impacts of mining in many indigenous communities. And many indigenous communities actually depend on that just because they can't, they're hinterland based and not on the coast, so they can't really access, I'd say, the services in the oil and gas industry as easily. So they still depend on mining
Right.
in many of those communities. But I'd like to find, or maybe see a Guyana where there is a different economic formula for those communities, where they're plugged in a different way. I know it's a tall order, it's a tall ask, but you know, one can dream.
Yeah, and you know, Lennox, I wasn't sure what to expect from the conversation with you because I'd never met you before, and I'd only heard the more exotic stuff about your couture. But tell me this: you paint a very attractive picture of what's happening. You know, a very progressive picture. Why do you think immigration rates are increasing?
I think a lot of people still have this mentality that they have to leave the shores of Guyana to say that they've made it. It is not, it is a fixation that people have. I know a lot of people who put their heads down and they attain, and I could speak very authoritatively about that because I know quite a lot of them. And they say, why would I want to go anywhere else? The immigration rate, once again, I think it is an anomaly, and I don't know that it is because of the economics of Guyana. I really don't have a very solid answer for you on that. People look at the opportunities elsewhere, right? I know of people who would have left Guyana, have successful businesses, and you ask them to sweep the floor in Guyana, nope, 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 I'm not going to do that. But then they would go to a place like New York and they're busy washing cars and sweeping floors for a living.
So in a sense, there has to be some, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I really cannot put a finger on the psychology that drives people to do that.
Do you think people are, in general, better off than they were?
I strongly believe so. When you look at the amount of, sorry, I want to sneeze. But when you look at the infrastructural development in Guyana, right? We've got a lot more roads, a lot more highways, and all of them paved, and the roads are going longer and farther, getting more integrated. But yet when you travel on those roads in the afternoon, they're all crowded. So people, I think they're going through about, what, 5,000 cars every 3 months. Obviously, the spending power is there. People are doing well. Everyone is not doing well. Why? That is the reality. Every single economy has the same issues. You go to the US, what we term as one of the wealthiest nations in the world. But then you go to some of those communities in Detroit and Michigan and a whole other set of places, and you're going to see poverty, abject poverty.
Okay.
People sleeping on the streets in tents. Why? That is the nature of economies. Guyana is no different. I'm not saying that everyone is going to be that way, and not everyone will be successful, but I think sometimes we, as Guyanese, people find themselves caught up in a very lethargic position, very lazy, right? They've always gotten remittance.
Right.
So now the remittance started to dry up. Now we're going to look to the government. We've got oil money. So because we're getting oil money, you know what? I'm just going to sit down here and I'm going to make a lot of noise because I want that money without doing any work. And what, you know, if we're to go down that path, all we're doing is building a lazy nation. I've seen stores, I've seen a whole lot of employment in Guyana. You drive by, help wanted, help wanted, help wanted. And some people would just look at it, no, I don't want to do that. No, I'm not going to work. I'll wait for this. I'll wait for that.
Okay, so the increase in migration is because people are lazy. Because we're living better lives. There's a lot new infrastructure, but okay, so we're late.
No, I'm not saying that the migration is solely because of that. I said I cannot pinpoint the psychology as to why people are migrating. Maybe it is just a fixation they have that my aunts, uncles, and cousins are over there. So just as I have the opportunity, I'm going to go and join them.
Okay, gotcha.
And if you look at it too, it is promoted very much so by people who go back to Guyana. If you go down from the US or Canada or the UK to Guyana, all people see is that you're partying for a week or two, you're spending a lot, you're going here, you're going there, you're giving away this and that. So it creates this optic that life is better outside of Guyana because of how much people are spending in that short time. But the interesting thing is when Guyanese leave the shores and they go over to those countries, then they see the reality and it really catches up with them.
Right.
So they're taken by pride. They can't just go back and say, no, I went over there to sweep floor. If they have to go back to Guyana and spend that little money and lie about what they do, you know, no, I'm a custodian. Well, fancy name for cleaner.
So Lennox, we're fast running out of time, and there's just one thing I want to touch on briefly before giving you a chance to summarize in a minute. You know, a friend of mine today is in Region 7, doing a lot of work on child abuse and child rape, etc. Is this, and according to her, the rates have been increasing. Is this a problem in Indigenous communities?
It is a problem across Guyana. And it is a problem that has gone unreported for a long time. If you look at UNICEF published a study in a report in 2016 that spoke on the status of Indigenous women and children. It has some very rich data in there about the challenges that many communities face. And once again, it is not confined to Indigenous communities. It is actually happening across Guyana. For those communities, I think more and more of it is coming to light. You're finding that the leadership in those communities have taken a bit more of a proactive approach in trying to get them addressed. I'm not saying that all of it gets sorted out. In some cases, access to justice in itself may be difficult just because of the zoning. If you commit, let's say you're charged in one of the communities in Region 7, you have to go to court. Where are you going to court? You're going to court in Essequibo. Region 7 is massive. Charge in Region 9, Upper Region 9, right? You don't really have the kind of structures. I mean, the government has started to build courts in Lethem, in Madhya, and other places to give people access to justice, but it is still a tremendous lot of work when some of those communities they're not on the roadmap as yet, like
right.
The physical road. So you have to not depend on a flight to get you from point A to point B. Sometimes families will sit there and say, well, I can't afford it. So, you pull back a bit. But as the economy is changing, I find that the reason why people are hearing a lot more about it and reporting it a lot more is because now they have access to the tools that they can report it.
Right. So, Lennox, I want to thank you for joining us. Fortuitously, because your other panelists pulled out, you've been able to have a real free run at things and shared your vision for. Actually, I was really intrigued by learning about your you growing up as a kid in St. Cuthbert's, and I'm certain there's a lot more to that than you managed to share with us this evening, and this amazing journey you've had to becoming a pilot, setting up your own airline, and deputy speak. We haven't talked about your deputy speakership, and we haven't even shown us some of your outfits. This is that was going to be my highlight. I'm sure Devin can put a few up for us.
We have not really scratched the surface too much yet.
Well, I'm going to be coming by you to grab a few outfits. So why don't you, in 30 seconds, share something with us that you have this evening?
There is still a lot more to share, and I don't know that 30 seconds will be enough, but I wanted to say thank you to yourself and the team, Nohar and Devin and everyone else. Thank you to your viewers and the people who supported us. We have not fallen off the map. We've been very circumspect in how we approach our work, and despite the silence, we have been achieving, and we will continue to do that.
Well, we look forward to hearing more from you and the Liberty and Justice Party and the journey you're going, you're effecting as you get closer and closer to the ruling party. Thanks a lot, Lennox, and I feel as if I've made a new friend. Thank you. And to our viewers, I hope we've learned a little bit more about Lennox and his side of his Guyana, which is an important side. And as we create this complex maze of things we call Guyana. So thanks a lot, and look forward to hearing much more from you. And please join us again next Wednesday. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you.